The People's Platform.
Good evening and welcome to the show. A significant percentage of the labour force of Sri Lanka falls outside the ambit and protection of the formal labour market. How can we look at social protection from a broader policy development perspective? Let's find out by speaking to our guest tonight, Professor Siri Hettige, Emeritus Professor, University of Colombo. Good evening and welcome to the show, Professor. Professor, speak to us about whether Sri Lanka's current social protection system adequately addresses the vulnerable segments of society, also taking into account the nexus between development on the one hand and welfare on the other.
Well, this has been an issue that has been discussed by various professional groups and also in various disciplines, in particular, sociology and also, of course, even economics. Now, the question is whether we should, really have a balance between development and welfare, in the sense that if you just pursue your development goals, like, higher rate of growth, higher level of GDP, and then, larger, economy and so on and so forth, at the expense of taking care of the welfare needs of the people, then there is going to be not only an imbalance between development and welfare, but also it is going to impact also on development itself. Like, for instance, it might even hamper development, because welfare would improve the quality of life of the people across the board, which means that it is easier to develop human resources under such circumstances. I mean, if the living conditions, social and economic conditions of the vast majority of the people in the country can be improved, it will create a better environment for you to develop human resources. We all know human resource development is so critical for economic development. Because if you don't have, let's say, a skilled population, a skilled, workforce, and also, people with, all the necessary technical skills in diverse fields and so on and so forth, you won't be able to promote economic development, because you can't import human resources. I mean, of course, some countries do, but a country like Sri Lanka should concentrate on human resource development, because that would also create a conducive environment for the development process to unfold. So I think as a result, what we have seen here is we have had problems with development itself, while we are also having various problems associated with welfare and social protection of vulnerable segments of society. So therefore, there is a need for us to at least now to basically look at this issue from a broader perspective and look at what other countries have done in the rest of the world, because we are not alone in this world. So therefore, we have to learn from countries that have done well. For instance, if you look at the welfare states, I mean, there are some countries that are specifically termed as welfare states, because they concentrate on welfare, not at the expense of development, but while pursuing development, you also concentrate on, so that you strike a balance between the two. Welfare and development go hand in hand, rather than one after the other.
Right.
Because there is a saying that unless and until the country is developed, you won't be able to have higher level of public spending on welfare and so on and so forth. I think that is not true if you really look at the experience in the rest of the world, and actually more and more now. Developing countries have also come to the conclusion, I mean, many developing countries have also come to a point where they would like to concentrate on social protection of various segments of society from a life, course approach, life cycle approach, like starting with, very small children, going right up to the elderly. So in between, of course, you have different segments of the population and so on. Yeah.
Now, in Sri Lanka, if we take the lower income groups, they don't really have much to fall back on. So it's basically hand-to-mouth existence if we take our daily wage earners and other segments of society that fall into the marginalized or vulnerable income earner category. So is the system perpetuating these inequalities? Are our social protection nets not wide enough? We have now the Aswasuma program over and above the Samurdhi welfare benefits. There are several other listed welfare programs in Sri Lanka as well. So if these don't suffice, what more structural, holistic shifts must we engage in?
Yes, I think in this case we have to really look at the structure of the economy. Now, with economic development, one would expect an expansion, rapid expansion of the formal labor market. Formal labor market, people who are engaged in, the formal sector. It may be public, it may be private. But if you don't have that kind of a, reduction in informal employment with economic growth, then you have a huge problem, because they are, on the one hand, they have economic problems because they can't find good employment, lucrative employment, and so and so. But at the same time, when they face all kinds of difficulties, they don't really have a fallback option, as you have rightly said. I mean, for instance, if they can't find work today in the informal sector, that's what happens. You are casually employed. You run around looking for work on a day-to-day basis. And if you really don't have, welfare, programs to cushion you against the adversities, then your whole family, your whole community can be, really in a bad way. So the point is that to assume that with development you will still have a huge informal sector as we have in Sri Lanka. We have over 50%. I saw one estimate about 60% of our labor force. I mean, it is very much in the informal sector. I mean, they are not really into regular employment, because with regular employment you have these social protection schemes. Like, for instance, when you are sick, you don't really lose your wages because you can apply for sick leave. And then you have also leave, like regular employees can take a certain number of days, leave, so that they can also, take care of other needs if they really have to. Because they can, they can get paid leave.
Also the legal protection.
And then also, if you face an accident, for instance, I mean, you will be protected by certain schemes and so on and so forth. And then also, when you reach a certain age, when you have to retire, you're quite sure that you have a pension scheme, which will take care of will take care of you, not only you, even your dependents and so on and so forth. So the point is that that we certainly have to make sure that with the economic development, we have more and more regular employment rather than less and less. I think we have not been able to really achieve that in Sri Lanka up to now.
Can we also look at the option of regularizing the informal sector?
Now, there are ways to do that, and in fact, there had been attempts in the past, like to introduce, let's say certain schemes like farmers' pension scheme, informal sector workers, pension scheme, and then also fishermen's pension scheme and so on and so forth. But they have really not done very well, and as a result, they don't really make much of a difference today. So, for instance, the question then is, of course, whether you go for piecemeal approach, like taking care of different segments, like the farmers and informal sector workers, migrant workers, and so on, or whether you have a more holistic approach to take care of all those who really need protection. And who needs protection? I think almost everyone needs protection in one form or the other. Like, for instance, like nowadays, many people talk about, as I already mentioned, a life cycle approach, because you see, you have to have social protection from early years of life, going right up to your old age. And then, of course, in between, there are also situations when you need, let's say, social protection, like, as I already mentioned, if you can't find work, and if you lose your job, then you have to have a fallback option. I mean, you can't be hanging around without an income, because your family members can't wait till you find employment in in the due course. So obviously, we need to really look at this from a broader perspective now, because as you already know, I mean, because of this economic crisis, more and more people have been exposed to very adverse conditions of life. So, yeah.
Let's talk about some of the solutions we can look at after this short commercial break. We'll be right back.
The People's Platform.
ජනාධිපතිතුමාගේ විදිහට අපි ගොඩද
මේ ප්‍රතිපත්ති රාමුවත් මේකත් හිස් වූ රාමුවක්
නායකෙක්ට පුළුවන් අවශ්‍යයි නම් සංවේදීත් වෙලා ඒ වෙලාවෙම තාර්කිකත් වෙන්න.
ජානමය හේතුත් බලපාන්න පුළුවන් ද සමහර වෙලාවට මානසික තත්ත්ව වෙනස් වෙන්න.
මානසික රෝගයක් 80%ක් ජානගතයි. 20%ක් එන්වයරන්මන්ට් එකේ ඉන්නේ.
නින්දේදිත් සිදුවෙන ශ්වසන අපහසුතාවන් පිළිබඳ අපිට වාර්තා වෙනවා. මේක ගොරවනකොට වැඩි වෙනවද?
නින්දේදී සිදුවන ශ්වසන අවහිරතාවය නැත්නම් අපි මේක හඳුන්වනවා මේ obstructive sleep apnea කියන තත්ත්වය.
ජාතික මෙහෙවර සතියේ දිනවල උදෑසන 11ට.
Vision, Saturday 7:30 p.m.
Miss Pooja, इसके तो मैं काटे इधर Miss
පූජා රඝුවර.
Sorry madam, මේ වෙලාවේ මට පොඩ්ඩක් අඳුර ගන්න බැරුණා. අර අපේ ගොල්ලෙක් තමයි කිව්වේ madam අවලා කියලා. මම ආසයි madam එක්ක වැඩ කරන්න.
තවමත් මගේ දෛවය මට නපුරු. අතීතයේ අඳුරු හිමිනලි තාමත් මගේ ජීවිතය අහුමුළු වල තියෙනවා.
ඔයාව කියන තරම් එයාව අන්දන්න රවට්ටන්න ලේසි නෑ. වෙලාවක ඔයාව ඔෆිස් එකෙන් එලවලා දාන්න බැරි.
ඔයා වරදක් කළාද නැද්ද කියලා මම හිතුවට වැඩක් නෑ. තමන් වරදක් කළාද නැද්ද කියන එක තමන්ට හිතෙන්නේ.
නීල පබලු අද රාත්‍රී 9ට සිරස ටෙලිතිරයෙන්. අපිට කවදාවත් පිරිසිදු වතුර තිබුණේ නැහැ බොන්න. අපේ දරුවන්ටත් පිරිසිදු වතුර නැහැ බොන්න. හැමදාමත් අපේ ගම්වල පිරිසිදු වතුර නැතිව හැදෙන රෝග වැඩි. හැබැයි අදින් පස්සේ අම්පාර නාවින්න උනාපාන අපේ දරුවන්ට හොඳ අනාගතයක් ලැබේවි. මේ ලැබුණු ජලපිරණයත් එක්ක ගම්මැද්ද රට නගන ජන පෞර. TV1 TV life. Presidential election will be held on time. A statement from the President's Media Division. Gammanpilla's expose on attempts to postpone elections by abolishing the executive presidency. Senegal in crisis after elections were postponed. Cabinet approved further amendments to the Online Safety Act. Preparations to expedite the Broadcasting Regulatory Commission Act. No solution. Health trade unions continue strike action. TV1. TV for life. The People's Platform.
Welcome back. Towards inclusive and equitable social protection is our topic of discussion tonight. Professor Siri Hettige, let's talk about potential resolutions to this crisis. India has what is known as the Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme, which can protect vulnerable segments of society. Can you take us through this program as well as programs that have been undertaken by other jurisdictions, which we can also learn from?
Yeah, now in the case of the Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme, I think it has been implemented, as a union government program, basically financed by the central government, and I think that has really provided so much relief to people who are vulnerable in the labour market, particularly in rural areas. As you know, India is a vast country, and there is still so much underdevelopment in many parts of the country, and also they also have let's say large informal sector and so on and so forth. So obviously addressing those issues through one single program is not going to really work. But on the other hand, when you look around the world, I think more and more countries have come to the conclusion, based on evidence, based on research that has been done in different parts of the world, and so on, that if you really want to address poverty and inequality, these are two very big issues in many developing countries, and also of course in even some developed countries like in the United States, for instance. It is absolutely necessary to have a more, let's say, broad-based social protection system, which has so many components that would address the needs of different segments of society. Now I already mentioned the fact that many have basically emphasize the need to have a life cycle approach, so that you take care of people who are going to be vulnerable in one way or the other from birth onwards. So you have children, and in many countries have child benefit schemes, and so that children are taken very seriously in the welfare system, and the parents are supported with various benefits so that they can take care of the needs of the children. So instead of just leaving it open, you make sure that the children's needs are taken care of. And then of course you have in some countries youth allowances, like in Australia they have a youth allowance, which means that a young person is entitled for a youth allowance until the person reaches an age when he can become self-sufficient after employment, education, and so on and so forth. And then of course you have even people who are employed, as I already mentioned, can face various challenges. It's not just losing their jobs, but also facing various other issues like illnesses and and so on. So the point is that you have to think on those lines, and then of course, what happens to you when you retire? Now, how many people can retire in Sri Lanka today? I mean, because our formal, pension schemes cover only a very small proportion of the population. I mean, but whereas, pension is a need. I mean, because how do you? I mean, you work. Assuming that people naturally have been productive and they have contributed to the economy and the welfare of the other people by doing their work. And then what happens to them? I mean, it depends on whether you have a dependable, adequate, pension coming your way when you can no longer work. And then, of course, there are people who face various other difficulties, maybe due to disabilities. And disabilities come even while you are working, for instance. I mean, you might face an accident and you might become disabled and so on. So the point is that if you really look at all these segments of population, you cannot have a piecemeal approach. And the point is that, we talk about poverty alleviation. There we say, what is the proportion of people who are on poverty alleviation support? I mean, when poverty line was defined as, as in a very strict sense, and that we had, something like less than 5% poor falling below the poverty line, I mean, it was very easy to really take care of 5%. But whereas now, what is the proportion of the people who are poor? And then the other thing is, it's not only poverty, it's also a whole range of other vulnerabilities. In fact, today, we are not talking about poverty as such. Poverty is a residual issue. There are so many issues that surround poverty. And for instance, these vulnerabilities can come from various sources.
So, while there are multidimensional vulnerabilities, as you just mentioned, there is also a multi-pronged crisis, and the government is very much indebted and has very little resources. So how can we expect the government to prioritize social protection when there are so many other things that need to be prioritized?
Unless and until you accept social policy as important as economic policy. Economic development is important for any country. But what is not immediately accepted by many people is that social development is as important, if not more. But the point is that here, there has been a tendency on the part of many people to assume that if the country can be developed, everything will fall in place. Now, that won't happen. I mean, we have seen, actually, there has been a very major effort on the part of some countries to ensure that there is a balance between economic policy and social policy. You can have economic growth, you can produce wealth, but if that wealth is not distributed, and if that wealth doesn't really benefit the wider population, and nowadays we are talking about taking care of the environment and and so on. So I think we have to really rethink. Now, of course, we are in a situation where many people don't think anymore. They are just we are trying to somehow manage things as much as we can, but we have to also think in terms of the future. I mean, whether we would like to rethink some of the matters that we have really not managed very well. I think we have to rethink, and there I think we probably have to come to the conclusion that while pursuing economic development, which of course is very, very important, and then environmental protection, and then addressing the large issue of climate change, we also have to take care of the social needs of the population. And there we have to not only strengthen our public services like health, education, transport and public transport and so on and so forth, because if you really concentrate on public services, that will take a lot of pressure off the vulnerable people.
My final question to you is, Professor, where does citizen engagement and citizen agency come in, as well as financial literacy? Sometimes we have the money, but we don't know how to manage our finances because we haven't been taught financial literacy. So we lack knowledge and the skill set.
Well, there are two approaches. One is, of course, making use of the education system that we have at our disposal to address some of these issues. Like, for instance, in the past when we talked about literacy, we talked about ability to read and write. But today we are talking about a whole range of other skills. Now you talked about financial literacy. And then of course you also have environmental literacy. We should know what the challenges that, and then we also have to have digital literacy, because today we are living in a digitized world and so. So the point is that we have to also have, let's say, political literacy. I mean, we should know where we are in terms of political systems and how governments function and so on and so forth. So citizenship education has to be a critical component. And then of course we also have to think about making people more socially conscious and then also morally conscious, and that is where the moral education come in. So but the point is that in Sri Lanka, unfortunately, we have looked at education from a very narrow instrumentalist perspective. To how to get children to pass examinations and get certain skills and so on and so forth. But the purpose of education has a larger purpose, and the larger purpose, I think, is to really address the issues that we just mentioned. It's not literacy alone today is not enough. Being able to read and write, because we know that we have to use our digital various instruments that we are at our disposal, like smartphones and various other gadgets that we are using. So I have a feeling that that we have to use the education system. And then the other thing is, of course, as citizenship engagement depends on participatory democracy. We have to have a policy on promoting participatory democracy, and there are countries where participatory democracy has been introduced. Even our neighbor India, they introduced an amendment to the constitution to strengthen the local governance, and there they made sure that the citizens participate in local governance in their own areas. Now, as you know, in Switzerland, I mean, you have been there, I have also been there, and the people participate in the management of local affairs, and they participate even in the decision making process to by voting and so on and so forth. So the point is that citizens have to be activated, citizens have to be educated, citizens have to be reoriented towards governance, towards managing their own affairs where it is possible. At a local level it is possible, of course. Then the rest, of course, is delegated to people who are representing them at other levels, like the provincial and the parliament level.
All right, thank you very much, Professor Siri Hettige. Always a pleasure to have these conversations with you. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you for watching us. We'll see you again tomorrow. Good night.